The document hit the desk like a thunderclap. Reginald Croft snatched it up with hands that trembled, not from age, but from something far more dangerous, rage. His eyes swept across the papers, the official seals, the notary stamps, and the filed dates, and every line he read drained another shade of color from his already pallid face. The railroad man, the most feared baron west of the Mississippi, a man who had crushed entire townships beneath the iron wheels of his ambition, stood in the Sweetwater County Courthouse in Laramie, Wyoming Territory, in the year of our Lord 1883, and felt the ground shift beneath his polished boots. "This is impossible," he said. His voice came out low, almost a whisper, which made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Filed at 4:47 in the morning," said the county clerk, Mr. Osgood, adjusting his spectacles with a shaking hand. "She brought it herself, sir. Walked right in when we opened. The paperwork is in perfect order. Every statute cited, every code referenced. I checked it twice." Croft set the document down with the deliberate slowness of a man trying very hard not to destroy the room around him. He turned to look at the widow standing across the mahogany-trimmed room. She was small in stature, with dark eyes that held no fear, her hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat that had seen better years. She wore her grief quietly, but there was nothing quiet about the intelligence behind her gaze. "Mrs. Margaret Ellison," Croft said slowly, as if tasting each syllable and finding it bitter. "I told you last week that you had nothing to stand on. I told your lawyer the same thing." "You told my late husband's lawyer that," the widow said carefully. "And perhaps you were right. But someone else filed on my behalf." Croft's eyes cut across the room to where Augusta Grayson stood beside the window, the morning sun catching the clean lines of her jaw and the absolute stillness of her posture. She held a leather document satchel under one arm, and she watched Reginald Croft the way a woman watches a rattlesnake she has already pinned behind the head. "You," Croft said. "Me," Augusta answered. He stared at her for a long moment, taking stock, the way powerful men do when they realize they have underestimated someone they assumed was beneath their notice. Augusta Grayson was 31 years old, trained as a paralegal under the firm of Mercer and Associates in Denver before she had come west to Sweetwater, and she had spent the last 3 sleepless nights constructing a legal argument that would make Reginald Croft's blood run cold. She had filed it before the sun crested the horizon, before Croft's own lawyers had rolled out of their hotel beds, before the world had a single chance to stop her. "You have no authority," Croft said. "You are not an attorney of record." "No," Augusta agreed pleasantly. "But I am a licensed paralegal under the Wyoming Territory Code of 1881, and as you'll see on page 4 of that filing, I prepared and submitted that brief on behalf of a qualified attorney of record, Judge Harlan Whitmore, retired, currently residing in Cheyenne, whose signature appears on the final page. He reviewed my work by telegraph correspondence and signed a sworn affidavit of authorization, which is also filed, also before sunrise." The silence that fell was enormous. It was into this silence that Aaron Hudson walked through the courthouse door, his boots leaving red dust on the clean floor, his hat in his hands, his dark eyes moving quickly from face to face the way a man does when he has arrived somewhere and is trying to understand fast what kind of trouble is already in motion. He would learn soon enough. He always did. But the story of how Aaron Hudson came to be standing in that courthouse, and how he came to love the most dangerous, brilliant, capable woman he had ever laid eyes on, began 3 weeks before that morning, when the first body was found beside the railroad survey stakes, and Augusta Grayson rode into Sweetwater alone. 3 weeks earlier, the town of Sweetwater, Wyoming Territory, sat at the edge of a basin where the wind came off the mountains in long, clean sweeps and smelled of pine and early snow even in August. It was a town of maybe 400 souls, built on cattle and stubbornness, with a main street of false-fronted buildings, a general store, a land office, a saloon that doubled as the dentist's waiting room on Thursdays, and a telegraph office that had only recently been connected to the wider world. Augusta Grayson arrived on the afternoon stage from Rawlins, riding with a crate of law books, a portable writing desk, and a Winchester Model 1873 rifle she carried with the casual ease of someone who had used it many times and did not feel the need to announce the fact. She stepped down from the coach, set her bags on the board sidewalk, and looked at Sweetwater the way she looked at everything, carefully, completely, and without flinching. She had come because of a letter. The letter had been sent to her employer in Denver, addressed to any willing legal representative, signed by a woman named Margaret Ellison, widow of Thomas Ellison, who had until 6 months ago owned a homestead of 320 acres on the northern edge of the Sweetwater Basin. Thomas Ellison had died in March under circumstances his widow found suspicious. Within weeks of his death, representatives of the Croft Pacific Railway Company had appeared at the widow's door, with papers claiming that Thomas Ellison had signed an easement agreement the previous autumn, granting the railway unlimited right-of-way across the Ellison property. The papers were notarized. They appeared legal. The land office had accepted them. Margaret Ellison had one problem with all of this. Her husband had never signed those papers. She had been at his side every day of his life. He had never in his 53 years on this earth signed anything without telling her. And in the autumn in question, Thomas had been bedridden with a fever that had kept him from even writing a letter to their son in Cheyenne. The letter had been forwarded to Augusta because every other attorney and paralegal in Mercer and Associates had turned it down. The case was difficult, the location was remote, and Reginald Croft was the kind of man whose shadow made other men step aside. Augusta had taken the case for $140, a sum that represented every dollar of her savings and which she had paid into the firm's trust account herself, essentially financing her own commission, because someone had to do it and no one else would. That was the kind of woman Augusta Grayson was. She found a room at the Sweetwater Hotel, a narrow space above the kitchen that smelled of biscuits and wood smoke, and she set up her writing desk that same evening and began to read every document she had been able to acquire regarding the Ellison easement. She read until midnight, made notes in her sharp, precise handwriting, and then slept for 5 hours before rising in the dark to read again. She met Aaron Hudson at 6 in the morning on her second day in Sweetwater. He nearly ran her down with his horse. It was not his fault entirely. The street was still shadowed, the sun not yet fully over the eastern rim, and Augusta had come around the corner of the livery stable without looking, her head down over a notebook, her mind deep in a problem about the legal validity of a notarized document when the notary in question was not present in the county at the time of supposed signing. Aaron's chestnut horse shied hard to the left, hooves scrabbling on the packed dirt, and Aaron brought the animal down with the instant, sure-handed control of a man who had been riding since before he could reliably walk. "Whoa," he said to the horse, and then to Augusta, "You all right, ma'am?" She looked up from her notebook. She assessed him the way she assessed everything, quickly, completely. He was tall in the saddle, broad across the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same red rock as the surrounding cliffs. He wore a sun-darkened hat and a canvas duster, and his hands on the reins were calloused and steady. He was looking at her with an expression that was somewhere between concern and something more cautious, the expression of a man who did not quite know what to make of what he was seeing. "Perfectly fine," Augusta said. "My apologies for the corner, I was distracted." "Distracted by what?" he asked, because the question came naturally and he asked it before thinking, which was a habit of his. "Notary law," she said. There was a pause. "That's a new one," he said. "Aaron Hudson," called a voice from across the street. A deputy was leaning against the sheriff's office door, cup of coffee in hand. "Sheriff wants you when you're done nearly trampling visitors." "I'll be right there," Aaron called back. He looked down at Augusta again. "You're staying in town." "For now," she said. "Hudson," the deputy called again. Aaron touched his hat brim to her, a small gesture that managed to be respectful rather than dismissive, and wheeled the chestnut toward the sheriff's office. Augusta watched him go for precisely 2 seconds, filed the observation "good horseman, law-adjacent employment, knows the deputy by name, therefore likely a regular visitor or a deputized man himself," and returned to her notebook. She found out at breakfast that Aaron Hudson was the foreman of the Croft Pacific Railway survey team. She sat very still with that information for a moment, stirring her coffee. Then she thought, well, that is complicated. Margaret Ellison came to see Augusta that afternoon at the hotel, a small woman in her late 50s with white hair and a straight spine and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from a life spent working hard and loving well. She brought a tin of biscuits and a box of papers, and she set them both on the narrow table beside Augusta's writing desk with the same careful deliberateness. "I did not know who else to write to," Margaret said. "You wrote to the right place," Augusta told her. "Tell me everything. Start with the autumn your husband was ill." Margaret talked for 2 hours. Augusta wrote everything down. When Margaret finished, Augusta sat for a moment reviewing her notes, and then she asked 17 very specific questions, each one more pointed than the last, and Margaret answered every one. When Margaret finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Mr. Croft's men have been watching my house," she said simply. "2 men the past week. They sit in the trees on the ridge." "I know," Augusta said. "I saw them this morning when I rode out to look at your property line. Don't worry about them. Worry is wasted energy." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "How old are you, child?" 31, Augusta said. "You remind me of myself at 31, Margaret said softly. "Only smarter." She gave a small smile and went out. Augusta turned back to her papers. The next morning she rode out to the land office to look at the recorded documents. This was where it began to get interesting. The county land office was kept by a man named Hiram Slocum, who had a mustache like a paint brush and a nervous habit of straightening things on his desk when he was uncomfortable. He straightened his inkwell 3 times while Augusta examined the Ellison easement filing, and twice more while she looked at the recording date notation, and then he physically moved to stand between her and the filing cabinet when she asked to see the notary register for October of the previous year. "Those records are for official use," he said. "I am here in an official capacity," Augusta said pleasantly, and produced her credentials, her letter of authorization from Margaret Ellison, and a note from Judge Whitmore's office that she had requested from Denver by telegraph and received that morning, which authorized her access to public land records in the course of legal research. Slocum read the document slowly. His mustache twitched. He moved away from the filing cabinet. The notary register was the first crack in Reginald Croft's wall. The notarization on Thomas Ellison's supposed easement agreement bore the stamp of one Calvin Breaux, a notary public operating out of Rawlins. The register, however, showed that Calvin Breaux had been in Cheyenne on the date in question, attending a documented church conference. His stamp had been used in Sweetwater on a day when he was provably 70 miles away. Augusta copied the relevant entries in the register with meticulous care, each number and date and name set down exactly as it appeared. Her handwriting was so precise it looked like typeset print. She thanked Slocum with a warmth that surprised him, given that he had not been particularly welcoming, and rode back to the hotel with the first piece of evidence tucked carefully in her satchel. She was unlocking the hotel door when she heard boots on the stairs behind her. "Miss Grayson," she turned. Aaron Hudson stood at the top of the staircase, hat in hand again, looking like a man who was approaching something he was not entirely sure about. He had clearly changed his coat since morning, which was a detail she noted without comment. "Mr. Hudson," she said. "I heard you were out at the land office this morning," he said. "News travels fast in Sweetwater." "It does," he paused. "I think we need to talk," she considered him. "About what specifically?" "About what you're doing here," he said, "and about the fact that Reginald Croft is going to know you were at that land office by sundown today." I expect he already knows, Augusta said calmly. She pushed her door open. You can come in if you like. I have coffee from this morning. It will be cold, but you look like a man who drinks cold coffee. He blinked. Then the corner of his mouth moved. That's accurate. She poured 2 cups and set one in front of him. He sat in the room's single chair while she settled herself at the writing desk, because the writing desk was her primary territory and she had no intention of vacating it. He looked around the room at the stacked law books, the papers organized into labeled categories, the 3-color notation system she used in her case files, and something shifted in his expression. You're really doing this, he said. I am really doing this, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I work for Croft Pacific, he said. I am aware. I surveyed that right-of-way line across the Ellison property, he said. I staked it 3 weeks ago. My name is on the survey documentation. I know, she said. I've seen it. Another pause. I didn't know the easement was forged, he said. It came out like a confession, direct and unvarnished, without apology but also without pretense. He said it the way a man says something true. I was given documents, told they were legitimate. I do survey work. I read maps, not legal filings. Augusta looked at him steadily. Why are you telling me this? Because I did some asking around, he said. After I saw you yesterday morning, about Thomas Ellison, about how he died. He set the coffee cup down. A man who ran cattle in this basin for 20 years does not fall off a horse he's ridden since it was a foal, not with a broken neck, not on flat ground. The room was very quiet. No, Augusta agreed softly, he does not. I don't know if I can help you, Aaron said. I have a contract with Croft Pacific. I have 6 men working under me who need their pay, and I don't know enough about what happened to say anything official. He met her eyes directly. But I thought you should know that you have one person in this town who is not Croft's man. Not completely. She studied him for a long moment, looking for the lie or the trap, because she had learned long ago that the most dangerous moments were the ones that looked like gifts. She found neither. What she found instead was a man who looked genuinely troubled and genuinely honest, which was its own kind of danger, the kind she was less equipped to defend against. Thank you, she said, and meant it simply. He stood to go. At the door he paused and turned back. That rifle on the wall, he said, nodding toward the Winchester. You shoot. Better than most, she said. He nodded as if this was a satisfying answer. Good, he said. Keep it close. Over the next 4 days, Augusta built her case the way she built everything, methodically, tirelessly, with a kind of focused intensity that she had never once considered remarkable, because it had always simply been the way she operated. She sent 7 telegrams. To the church in Cheyenne that had hosted the conference Calvin Bro attended, to the Rawlins County Clerk's office for additional notary records, to the Wyoming Territory Attorney General's office for precedent on fraudulent easement filings, to Judge Whitmore in Cheyenne, to Thomas Ellison's son William, who was now living in Cheyenne working as a surveyor, to the Denver Law Library for case citations, and to a friend in the territorial government who had once mentioned knowing something about Croft Pacific's acquisition methods in Uintah County 3 years prior. Responses came back in pieces over 2 days. Each one added another layer to the argument she was constructing. Aaron appeared again on the 3rd day, this time with a purpose. He had brought William Ellison surveying records of the original homestead boundary, documents the young man had kept because his father had asked him to. William had written a letter, which Aaron had collected from the telegraph office on Augusta's behalf because the clerk, who was one of Croft's informal informants, had been slow to deliver it. He's holding your messages, Aaron told her flatly, setting the letter on her desk. I waited at the office until he went to get his lunch, and then I asked to collect mail for the Grayson party. He'd had it since this morning. Augusta read the letter quickly. She looked up. This is critical, she said. Thank you. What is it? She hesitated for only a fraction of a second. She had not shared the details of her legal strategy with anyone, But Aaron Hudson had just intervened on her behalf at some personal risk, and he had done it without being asked, and she had a feeling she might need him again before this was over. Thomas Ellison's original homestead deed, she said, was filed with a competing right-of-way reservation for future use. In 1876, before Croft Pacific was even incorporated in this territory. Which means that even if the easement agreement had been legitimate, the reservation clause in the original deed would have created a legal conflict that needed court resolution before any transfer could take effect. The easement was not just forged, it was also applied incorrectly under territorial property law. Aaron stared at her. Croft's lawyers never looked at the original deed language, she continued. Or they looked at it and assumed no one else would. The reservation clause is written in a non-standard format that was common in 1876 filings, but that most modern practitioners wouldn't recognize. She paused. Most modern practitioners. But you recognized it, he said. I spent 3 years cataloging historical property filings for a Denver law firm, she said. I have read approximately 9,000 territorial deeds. Yes, I recognized it. Aaron sat down heavily in the chair. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately classify, something between astonishment and admiration and something else she chose not to examine too closely. You're going to win this, he said. I'm going to try, she said. No, he said slowly. You're going to win this. I've watched a lot of people try to go against Croft Pacific. I've watched them lose. You're not going to lose, he paused. I don't know how you're not going to lose. I don't understand most of what you just said, but you're not going to lose. Flattery is not useful to me, she said, but she was slightly warmer when she said it than she intended to be, and she noticed that he noticed. It's not flattery, he said. It's an assessment. That evening they shared dinner at the hotel dining room, which was the first time they had been in the same space, without either a crisis or a specific purpose driving the conversation, and Augusta found it unexpectedly comfortable. Aaron talked about his work with a plain-spoken clarity she found attractive in a person, not his looks, which were objectively notable, but his manner of communication. He did not exaggerate and he did not minimize. He described the land the way a man describes something he genuinely loves, the basin and the mountains and the way the light changed over the rock faces through the day, and she listened with more attention than she had expected to give. You like this country, she said. I grew up in Ohio, he said. Came west at 19. The first time I rode out of Cheyenne on a clear morning and saw the Wind River Range, I understood why people die trying to get here. He looked at her. Where are you from? Philadelphia, she said. Originally, my father was a clerk in a law office. I used to sort his files when I was 9. I thought it was the most interesting thing in the world. Still think so, she considered. More so, she said. A file is a story. Every document is someone's life compressed into language. The law is just the mechanism by which those stories interact. She paused, slightly self-conscious. That sounds more poetic than I mean it to. No, he said. It sounds right, she looked at him. He was looking back at her with that direct, unhurried attention that was becoming familiar, and she felt something shift slightly in her chest, which she acknowledged privately and then set firmly to one side because she had a case to build and 3 days to build it. The threat came the following morning. She found a note slipped under her hotel door, written in an unsteady hand on railway company letterhead. It said, "The widow's cause is lost. You would be wise to take the next stage out of Sweetwater. There are accidents in this country that even careful people cannot avoid." Augusta read it twice, folded it carefully, and added it to her evidence file with a notation of the date and time it was found, and a description of the paper and handwriting. Then she loaded the Winchester and propped it against the wall beside the door, where she could reach it without getting up. She sent a telegram to the Territorial Marshal's office in Cheyenne describing the threatening note and requesting that the content be entered in the official record. She did this not because she expected immediate assistance, but because creating an official paper trail around threats was basic legal practice, and because if something happened to her, She wanted it on record that she had been threatened by parties with a known financial interest in the outcome of a specific case. When Aaron found out about the note, he came to the hotel immediately. She told him what she had done with it and what measures she had taken, and he stood there looking at her with his jaw tight and his hands very still, which she was beginning to recognize as his version of controlled frustration. "You should not be here alone," he said. "I am very capable of being here alone," she said. "That's not what I mean," he said. "I know you're capable. I have seen ample evidence of that. What I mean is that Croft's men are not going to be stopped by a Winchester and a telegram to Cheyenne that will take 3 days to result in anything useful." "What do you suggest?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Let me come by in the evenings," he said. "Check the perimeter. Talk with the hotel owner about who's been asking about you." She looked at him for a long moment. "You realize this puts you in direct conflict with your employer," she said. "My contract with Croft Pacific covers survey work," he said, "not whatever this is." "He may not see it that way." "No," Aaron agreed. "He probably won't." He held her gaze. "I'm asking to be allowed to help you stay safe, not to manage your case or your decisions, just the safety piece." She thought about it honestly. She thought about the 2 men Margaret Ellison had described watching from the trees, and the broken neck of a man who had ridden the same horse for 15 years, and the forged document with the impossible notary seal. She thought about the note on railway letterhead. "All right," she said, "the perimeter check and the hotel conversations. Nothing else without my direct request." "Agreed," he said immediately. He came by that evening, and the one after. He checked around the building, spoke to the owner, and then came back and sat with her while she worked, sometimes reading, sometimes just quiet, and she found to her surprise that his presence did not interfere with her concentration. It added something to the room instead, a quality of safety that she would not have admitted to wanting and that she had not known she needed. On the 5th evening, she looked up from her papers and found him watching her with an expression she had seen before in the moments he did not know she was paying attention, and this time she did not look away immediately. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. You get a look sometimes when you find something in a document, like you've caught someone in a lie. It's a remarkable thing to watch." She felt warmth rise in her face, which annoyed her. "You're staring at me while I work." "I'm sitting across the room," he said. "You're very hard not to notice." "Aaron," she said, with the deliberate use of his given name that she had not used before. "Augusta," he said back, and something in his voice on her name made the warmth worse. "I need to finish this brief," she said. "I know," he said, and went back to his book. But after that, the names were different between them, and they both knew it, and neither mentioned it directly, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The crisis arrived on the 7th day of her work. Reginald Croft came to Sweetwater in person. He arrived on a private rail car, the Croft Pacific's finest, all lacquered wood and brass fittings, and he brought 3 lawyers, 2 private detectives, and a man named Devin Cross who was technically employed as a security manager, and was in practice employed for the kinds of tasks that security managers are not supposed to perform. Croft was 58 years old, heavyset, with white hair and pale blue eyes that had the particular quality of a man who had gotten everything he had ever wanted by outlasting everyone who opposed him. He went directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Boyd Lennon was a man of 45 who had served Sweetwater honestly for 6 years, and who owed Reginald Croft nothing specific, but who understood very clearly that the railway represented the future of the territory, and that men who obstructed progress tended to find themselves on the wrong side of large, financially powerful organizations. He listened to Croft with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the floor, and agreed that he would look into any interference with legitimate railway business. Then Croft went to the hotel. Augusta was not there. She was at the county courthouse, reviewing land records with Mr. Osgood, who was more cooperative now that she had produced the full set of documentation she had accumulated, and had explained to him, in calm and specific terms, what his liability would be as custodian of fraudulent filings if he continued to obstruct access to public records. Osgood had become remarkably helpful. Aaron heard that Croft was in town within 30 minutes of his arrival because Aaron had 6 survey crew members moving around Sweetwater, and small towns have very short information pathways. He sent one of his men to the courthouse to warn Augusta, and then he went to deal with Croft himself. He found his employer in the hotel lobby. "Mr. Croft," he said. "Hudson." Croft looked at him with those pale eyes. "I hear you've been spending time with the woman who's causing me trouble." "I've been doing my survey work," Aaron said, "and I've been checking on the safety of a woman who received a threatening note." "Women who involve themselves in business matters that are not their concern sometimes find themselves in difficult positions," Croft said. "Women who have legal authority to represent a client in a property dispute are exercising rights guaranteed by territorial statute," Aaron said, and was slightly surprised by how cleanly that came out, having heard Augusta use similar phrasing several times over the past week. Croft studied him. "Your contract runs through October," he said. "I'd hate to see it terminated early." "If you terminate my contract without cause, the breach terms are clear," Aaron said. "My lawyer will collect." There was a silence. "You have a lawyer," Croft said. "Everyone should have one," Aaron said. He walked out. He went straight to the courthouse, where Augusta was in the middle of cross-referencing the notary register with the arrival records from the Rawlins stage line, building a timeline document that would demonstrate, date by date, hour by hour, the impossibility of Calvin Bro's signature being genuine. She looked up when Aaron appeared in the courthouse door and read his face immediately. "Croft is here," she said. "With lawyers and a man named Devin Cross who has a reputation you don't want to hear." "I've heard of Cross," she said calmly, which surprised him. "He was involved in a dispute in Uintah County 3 years ago." A rancher who opposed a Croft acquisition was found to have suddenly developed significant gambling debts and a forged lien against his property. Cross was connected to both events but never charged. She was already moving, gathering her papers with swift precision, organizing them into the satchel in a specific order that clearly meant something to her internal filing system. She worked so fast that Aaron could barely track what she was doing. "I need to get these copies to Margaret Ellison's house," she said, "and I need to send 3 telegrams tonight." "The telegraph office may not be safe," he said. "Then we'll use the one in Rawlins." She looked up. "Can you get me to Rawlins and back tonight?" He looked at her for 1 second, calculating. Rawlins was 20 miles. The road was passable on horseback even at night if you knew the route. "Yes," he said. They rode out as the sun went down, side by side on the road west, the mountains going from gold to purple behind them, and Augusta held the satchel against her side and said very little. Aaron rode slightly ahead at the curves, checking the road, and she noticed this without comment. It was the kind of protection that did not require discussion. "Tell me about the telegrams," he said after a while. "One to Judge Whitmore," she said, confirming the final elements of the brief and requesting his signature authorization. "One to the Territorial Attorney General's office, notifying them that I will be filing a formal complaint regarding document fraud and requesting oversight of the county land office records pending the outcome of the complaint. And one to a reporter I know at the Cheyenne Daily Leader." He glanced at her. "A reporter. Light is the best disinfectant," she said. "Croft can apply pressure in the dark." It is considerably more difficult to apply pressure when a major territorial newspaper has been informed that there is a significant legal dispute involving document fraud in Sweetwater County. He shook his head slowly with a quality that was close to wonder. "You thought of this before he got here," he said. "I thought of this before I got here," she corrected. "The reporter telegram was always part of the plan. I was just waiting for a specific trigger point. Croft arriving in person is that point." They rode in silence for a mile. "Augusta," he said. "Yes. What made you take this case? Really, you could have refused." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the darkening road ahead. The first stars were appearing over the mountains. The air had dropped to the cool, clear quality that Wyoming nights had in August, the kind of cold that was honest and clean. "My mother was a widow," she said. "When my father died, there were men who came to the house with papers, documents they said my father had signed, agreements about the house, about his savings. My mother did not understand them. She signed what they told her to sign." She paused. "I was 14. I understood enough to know something was wrong, but not enough to know what to do about it." Another pause. "We lost the house. We lost nearly everything. I watched my mother work her hands raw for 3 years to recover what was taken from her by men who used her confusion and her grief as a tool." Aaron said nothing. He knew the kind of silence that was the right response to something like that. "I became a paralegal so that I would understand documents," she said, "and so that I would know what to do, so that the next time someone brought papers to a widow's door, there would be someone who could read them correctly." She looked at the road. "I never expected it to be a career. It became one." "The best ones usually do," he said quietly. She glanced at him sidelong. He was looking straight ahead, profile dark against the sky, and there was something in the set of his jaw that was not quite sadness but was adjacent to it. "What about you?" she asked. He was quiet for longer than she expected. "My father lost his farm in Ohio to a railroad," he said finally. "Different company. Same story. I was 17. I thought if I understood how they worked, I could protect myself from them." He paused. "Instead, I ended up working for them. And yet here you are," she said. "And yet here I am," he agreed. They rode the rest of the way to Rawlins in a companionable quiet that felt, in ways Augusta had not allowed herself to examine closely, like something more than a temporary professional alliance. The Rawlins telegraph office was open late, staffed by a young woman named Cecily who knew her business and asked no unnecessary questions. Augusta sent all 3 telegrams in rapid succession, paying from a small envelope of cash she had folded into her satchel. Then she handed Cecily a 4th page, which she had written on the road, holding the paper against the saddle with one hand and writing with the other, which Aaron had watched with the kind of silent respect one reserves for genuinely impressive feats. "This one is for the clerk at the Sweetwater Land Office," she told him as they remounted, informing him that copies of all relevant documents have been secured at a secondary location, and that the destruction or modification of originals will be considered federal obstruction. "I may have slightly overstated my authority in that telegram, but the clerk does not know that, and the net effect will be the same." Aaron was in the process of raising one hand to adjust his hat. He stopped mid-motion. He looked at her. Then he laughed. It was a good laugh, genuine and unguarded, and it changed his face entirely, softening the strong angles into something younger and more open. "You're the most dangerous person I've ever met," he said. "Good," she said, and turned her horse back toward Sweetwater. They arrived back in town after midnight. He walked her to the hotel door and stood in the street while she went up to her room and lit the lamp, their agreed-upon signal that all was well. Then he walked to his own accommodations, which were at the far end of the street, and Augusta watched from her window as his tall silhouette moved through the dark, and she sat with a feeling she was not ready to name. Croft moved faster than she expected. The following morning, the county land office was locked. A sign on the door said it was closed for official review by order of the county commission. The county commission, as it happened, had held an emergency meeting the previous evening at which Reginald Croft had been present, along with a donation to the commission's general operating fund that had been openly and legally offered, and after what Augusta imagined had been very little deliberation, accepted. The land office closure was not, in itself, devastating. Augusta had her copies. But it was designed to signal something, to let her know that the walls of the institution were closing, and that Croft intended to use every lever available. She spent the morning at the hotel, completing the formal legal brief she had been building, and in the afternoon she went to find Margaret Ellison. Margaret's house was a 2-story frame building on the north edge of town, with a kitchen garden that had gone somewhat wild since Thomas died and chickens in the yard, and a dog that came out to sniff Augusta's hand, and then followed her inside with the confidence of an animal that trusts its instincts about people. Margaret made coffee and they sat at the kitchen table, and Augusta spread the papers out and walked her through everything. Margaret listened with the same quiet intensity she brought to everything. When Augusta finished, she sat for a moment. "He forged my husband's signature," she said. "Yes," Augusta said, "and we can prove it." "And Thomas," Margaret stopped, composed herself. "You think they killed him?" "I cannot prove that," Augusta said honestly. "Not with the evidence I have. What I can prove is the forgery and the fraudulent easement and the violation of the original deed reservation clause and the intimidation through the threatening note. That is sufficient to return your property rights and to create significant legal liability for Croft Pacific. The question of Thomas's death would require a separate investigation by the marshal's office." "One problem at a time," Margaret said. "Yes. What do you need from me?" "A sworn affidavit of everything you told me about Thomas's condition in October," Augusta said. "His illness, his inability to travel or sign documents, dates, witnesses, anything you remember, his doctor if he had one." "Dr. Ferris," Margaret said immediately, "came out twice in October. I can get you his records if he has them." "Please," Augusta paused, "and Margaret, I want you to know that whatever happens in the next few days, I have made sure that copies of every document and every piece of evidence are held at 3 separate locations outside Sweetwater. Croft cannot destroy this case by destroying what's here." Margaret looked at her across the table. "I believed that when I wrote the letter," she said. "I believe it more now." That evening, Devin Cross came to the hotel. Augusta knew who he was before he said a word. She had found a description of him in her Uintah County research. A lean man of 50 with cold, careful eyes and the manner of someone who has learned to make threats sound like reasonable business conversation. He knocked on her open door and stood in the frame and said that he was there to convey an offer from Mr. Croft. "The offer," he said, "is $1,000. For you to take your papers and your client and remove yourself from this matter. $1,000 is a significant sum." "It is," Augusta agreed. She was sitting at her writing desk. She did not stand up. "Tell Mr. Croft that my fee for abandoning a client in a legitimate legal case would be considerably higher. In fact, it's not a service I offer at any price." Cross looked at her for a long moment. His eyes moved to the Winchester on the wall. "Accidents happen," he said. "So do depositions," she said. "I have already provided a sworn statement to Judge Whitmore's office describing this conversation as anticipated, along with your name and your documented history in Uintah County. This conversation is being added to that record as we speak." She nodded toward her notebook, which was open beside her, and she had in fact been writing in it since before he knocked. "Anything you choose to do in this town will be directly connected to Reginald Croft by a chain of documented evidence." Cross was still. "Also," Augusta said pleasantly, "I am a good shot. The Winchester is loaded, and I am not frightened of you." He left. Augusta wrote for another 2 hours, then went to wash her hands for dinner. Her hands were steady. They always were. But she sat on the edge of the bed for a moment after she set the pen down and let herself acknowledge, privately and briefly, that she was very tired and slightly afraid and doing this entirely alone. A knock at the door. "It's Hudson," Aaron said. She got up and opened the door. He looked at her face and then past her at the room and then back at her face. "Cross came," he said. "It was not a question." "He left," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I come in?" She stood aside. He sat in the chair. She sat back at the desk. He had brought supper from the dining room, wrapped in cloth, which he set on the corner of the desk without comment. She ate while she talked, and he listened while she walked him through the conversation with Cross and the status of the brief and the timeline for filing. "I'm going to file in 3 days," she said. "I have to file in Laramie. The county courthouse there is the correct jurisdiction for a territorial property claim of this magnitude. I'll need to travel." "I'll take you," he said immediately. She looked at him. "Aaron, you took the stage in," he said. "Croft knows your route. Cross has resources. Let me take you by the alternate road through the southern pass. My crew boss Marcus has a supply wagon going to Laramie in 2 days for equipment. We can go with him. 3 people make better cover than one. She thought about it. It was logical. It was also, she recognized, another step in a direction she had not entirely decided to go. You keep helping me, she said. Yes, he said simply. Why, she asked, and it was a genuine question, not a challenge. He looked at her steadily. Because what you're doing is right, he said. And because I want to, he paused. In that order, if it matters. It matters, she said quietly. The 2 days before the filing were the most intense of Augusta's professional life, and also, she would later think, some of the most important days of her personal one. She and Aaron worked in a kind of synchronized rhythm that she had never experienced with anyone before. He collected information, managed the logistics, handled the physical territory of the situation, the routes, the cover, the physical security, while she built the legal architecture. They overlapped only at the margins, and at those margins they were exactly complementary. She told him things she needed him to know without having to explain the context. He brought her information and asked the right questions to sharpen her thinking. He never once talked over her, corrected her, or treated her intelligence as something to manage. The night before they were to leave, they sat late at the hotel, the lamp burning low, the town quiet, and Augusta finished the last page of the brief and set her pen down and pressed both hands flat on the desk and exhaled. Done, she said. Aaron looked up from the map he had been studying. He looked at the stack of papers she had assembled. Then he looked at her. You know, he said, when I was surveying the Ellison property 3 weeks ago, I found a spring. About a quarter mile from the main house on the north slope, clear water coming right up out of the rock. The kind of thing that makes land worth twice what anyone thinks it is. He paused. That spring is squarely within the disputed territory. If Croft gets that right-of-way, it runs right through it. She looked at him. You're saying there's an additional argument about resource rights. I'm saying that spring was not in any of the survey documents I was given, he said. I noted it in my own records but was told not to include it in the official survey. He reached into his coat pocket and put a folded paper on the desk. That's my original field notes. With the spring location and the date I was told to omit it. She unfolded the paper slowly. She read it. Then she read it again. She looked up. Aaron. This is evidence of deliberate omission of a material geographic feature from a legal survey. In conjunction with the notary fraud, this significantly elevates the case from simple document forgery to coordinated fraud against the territory itself. I know, he said. You're giving me your field notes. Yes. This ends your contract with Croft Pacific regardless of the outcome. Yes. She held his gaze. There was something very clear happening between them, and she did not look away from it, which was unusual for her. Why? She asked again. He leaned forward slightly. Because I surveyed that land and I wrote those notes, and every line in them is true, and a man I helped survey that property is dead, and his wife is being robbed of everything he built, and you have been working for 3 weeks on 2 hours of sleep a night to stop it. He stopped. And because you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met, and I am not willing to stand on the wrong side of what you're doing. The silence stretched. The lamp flickered in a draft from the window. Outside, the town was very still. Aaron, she said softly, you don't have to say anything, he said. I know your focus is on the case. It should be. We'll get you to Laramie and filed, and then you can decide whatever you want about everything else. He paused. I just needed you to know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood from the desk and crossed to where he was sitting and sat on the edge of the table beside his chair, which put her close enough that she could see the exact warm, dark color of his eyes in the lamplight. Aaron, she said again, and this time the word carried everything she had not yet said. He looked up at her. When this is done, she said, I would like very much to have dinner with you. Somewhere that is not a hotel room with legal documents, just dinner, and no crisis. Something opened in his face. I would like that, he said very quietly. She reached out and put her hand briefly over his where it rested on the map table just for a moment, just that much contact, and then she stood. "We should sleep," she said. "We have a long ride tomorrow." "We do," he agreed, and his voice was slightly rough in a way it had not been before. She went to bed and lay awake in the dark for a while, thinking about legal statutes and mountain roads and the precise warmth of his hand under hers, and she was not sure which thought was the most persistent. The ride to Laramie with Marcus and the supply wagon took all of the following day. Marcus was a quiet man of 40 with a long beard and excellent sense of direction, who asked no questions about the leather satchel Augusta kept on her lap for the entire journey, and provided a steady, comfortable presence on the road. They took the southern pass, as Aaron had planned, and they arrived in Laramie in the early evening without incident. Augusta spent the night at a boarding house, writing and rereading and organizing, and at 4 in the morning she lit her candle and read the completed brief from beginning to end for the final time, checking every citation, every date, every legal reference. She found one minor formatting error on page 7 and corrected it with the neatness of someone who could not leave an imperfection in a document she was about to submit to the official record. At 4:45 in the morning, before the sun rose, before Croft's lawyers were awake, before anyone in Sweetwater knew what was happening, Augusta Grayson walked into the Laramie courthouse, where the duty clerk for early filings was a young man named Tobias who had been on shift since midnight and who received her papers with the bleary professionalism of someone who had seen a great deal and was surprised by very little. He stamped the filing time, 4:47 in the morning. Augusta walked back out into the pre-dawn dark and stood on the courthouse steps and breathed the cold air and felt the particular quality of exhaustion that comes after something enormous has been completed. Aaron was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She had not told him what time she was going. She had not expected him to come. He was simply there in the dark, his hat in his hands, his breath making small clouds in the cold. "Done?" he asked. "Done," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then he opened his arms slightly, just enough to make the offer clear without making it a demand, and she came down the steps and let herself be held, and he wrapped his arms around her solidly and carefully, and she pressed her face briefly against his shoulder and breathed. They stood that way in the quiet dark for a long time. "What happens now?" he asked against her hair. "Now we go back," she said, "and we see what Reginald Croft does when he discovers what I filed." What Reginald Croft did was rage. They learned the shape of his rage in pieces as they returned to Sweetwater. Cross had been dispatched again, this time to Laramie, but there was nothing for him to do there. The filing was complete and official, and already moving through the territorial court system. A copy was on its way to the Attorney General's office. A copy was in the hands of a Cheyenne Daily Leader reporter named James Haverford, who had been a colleague of Augusta's informant source, and who was a very good journalist with a nose for a story about railroad corruption. When they arrived at Sweetwater, Croft was at the courthouse waiting, and that was the moment the story had begun with. The document on the desk, the blood drained from the pale face. The specific, legally precise, devastating paperwork that Augusta Grayson had built from nothing but late nights and sharp thinking, and an absolute refusal to be defeated. "Mr. Osgood," Croft said, after a long and terrible silence in the courthouse, "these filings reference documents from the land office, documents that you were supposed to have secured." "The documents are public record, sir," Osgood said miserably. "The reservation clause," one of Croft's lawyers said quietly, picking up one section of the brief and reading it, his face going through a rapid series of expressions. "Burroughs, look at this." He handed it to another lawyer. "The 1876 filing. We never—" "I see it," the second lawyer said. He read for a moment. "Reginald, this is genuine." "Of course it's genuine," Augusta said from across the room. Croft looked at her. "What do you want?" he said. His voice was very controlled. "What my client wants," Augusta said. "Her property rights restored to full legal status, free of any Croft Pacific easement or claim. a formal retraction of the fraudulent easement filing recorded with the county land office, payment of Mrs. Ellison's legal fees, and a sworn public statement that the easement agreement was submitted in error. In error, Croft repeated flatly. I am leaving you a small grace, Augusta said. I could pursue formal fraud charges. The evidence supports it. So does the notary record, the field survey omission that I also have in the filing. She watched one of Croft's lawyers turn sharply to look at Croft at that, confirming that the survey omission had not been widely known within the company, and the threatening communication delivered to me on company letterhead. The Attorney General's office has copies of all of it. The room was completely still. Aaron, standing just inside the door, watched Reginald Croft do the mathematics. He had seen powerful men do it before. The rapid calculation of exposure versus resistance, the moment when the cost of fighting exceeded the cost of settling. He had seen some men choose to fight anyway, past reason, past logic, out of pure pride. He was not sure what Croft would choose. Croft looked at his lawyers. The first one gave a microscopic nod. The second followed. Croft looked at Augusta. My attorneys will draw up the settlement terms, he said. Your attorneys will review the settlement terms, Augusta corrected. I have already drafted them. They are on page 19 of what you're holding. Croft turned to page 19. He read. The payment for Mrs. Ellison's legal fees is excessive, he said. It is $140, Augusta said. That is my fee. I am not charging a premium for the 3 weeks of work or the 20-mile overnight ride or the pre-dawn filing, just my base fee. Another silence. I will sign the settlement, Croft said. The process took 2 hours, conducted in the courthouse meeting room with Croft's lawyers on one side of a table and Augusta on the other, with Margaret Ellison present as the client and Aaron standing against the wall with his arms folded, which was not a legal function but was a physical one, and which none of Croft's lawyers chose to comment on. Augusta went through the settlement line by line. She did not rush. She did not accept vague language. When one of Croft's lawyers suggested softening the retraction wording from fraudulent submission to administrative error, she pointed to a specific exhibit in the brief and said, given that this exhibit demonstrates the notary was physically in Cheyenne on the date in question, I believe the record speaks clearly to the nature of the submission. We will use the original language. And they did. When it was signed, Margaret Ellison sat for a moment with the papers in her hands. Then she looked up at Augusta with an expression that was not triumph but something quieter and deeper relief, and the particular piece of a wrong being corrected. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for writing the letter, Augusta said. Croft and his lawyers left without speaking further. Cross, who had arrived in Sweetwater the previous evening and had spent the morning waiting outside the courthouse, followed them out and did not look at anyone. The sheriff, Boyd Lennon, who had also been present at Augusta's request as a witness to the formal proceedings, waited until the room was clear and then came to Augusta and said, Miss Grayson, I want you to know that I have passed the relevant evidence to the territorial marshal regarding the circumstances of Thomas Ellison's death. I expect an investigator within the week. Thank you, Sheriff, Augusta said. I should have done it sooner, he said. Yes, she agreed without bitterness. But you're doing it now. He nodded and went out. Aaron was still in the room. He and Augusta and Margaret were the only ones left. Margaret began gathering her own copies of the documents, moving slowly with the careful deliberateness of someone who is still a little stunned by what has just happened. Aaron looked at Augusta. She looked back at him. Dinner, he said. You promised me dinner. Somewhere that is not a hotel room with legal documents. She felt the smile come before she could control it, which was unusual. I believe I said I would like to have dinner with you, she said. You agreed. I don't know if that constitutes a promise. It constitutes an agreement, he said, which I understand is legally binding in your professional view. She laughed. It was a full, genuine laugh, the kind she did not produce often, and it surprised both of them slightly with the warmth of it. Margaret looked from one to the other with an expression of quiet, knowing satisfaction. Thomas used to say, she said softly, to no one in particular, that the best things happen when people stop pretending they don't care about each other. She folded her papers into her bag. I'm going home to feed my chickens. She kissed Augusta on the cheek. Come by on Thursday, I'll make biscuits. She went out. Augusta and Aaron stood in the quiet courthouse meeting room. Dinner, Augusta said. Tonight, he said. Tonight, she agreed. It was not the hotel dining room. He had arranged, with a thoughtfulness that she appreciated more than she immediately showed, a table at the Sweetwater Hotel's private dining room, a small back parlor that the owner opened on special occasions for an additional consideration, with a cloth on the table and the best dishes and candles, because it was evening, and the candles were practical as well as atmospheric, and a dinner from the kitchen that was considerably better than anything from the regular menu. Augusta had changed from her traveling clothes into the better of her two good dresses, a deep blue wool with white cuffs, and she had done her hair more carefully than usual, which she noted in the mirror and chose not to spend time analyzing. He was at the table when she came in, and he stood when she entered, which was a courtesy she found she did not want to dismiss. He had changed, too, into a clean dark coat and a white shirt and a new neckcloth, and he had clearly done his best with his hair, which wanted to do what it liked regardless. They sat across from each other, and for the first time since they had met, there was no case to discuss, no documents to review, no threat to assess. I don't know how to do this, Augusta admitted after a moment, because she had never been comfortable with pretense and she was not going to start now. Neither do I, he said. Not with someone like you. Someone like me, she repeated. Someone who knows what she is and what she's worth, he said. I've never been much for courtship in the conventional sense. I don't know the right words for this kind of conversation. He paused. I know what I feel. I'm less sure how to present it properly. Aaron, she said, I am a paralegal from Philadelphia who has been living out of a hotel room with legal documents for 3 weeks. I have limited interest in conventional presentation. Say what you mean. He looked at her steadily. I mean that I have spent 3 weeks watching you do something extraordinary, he said. Not extraordinary for a woman, extraordinary for anyone. You took a case that no one else would take with resources no one gave you against a man who has broken people far better positioned than you, and you won. Not by luck, not by accident, by being smarter and more prepared and more determined than everyone who tried to stop you. He paused. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you became the most important person in any room I'm in. I don't know when it happened. I just know it's true. Augusta was quiet for a moment. The candle between them was steady. The room was warm. I have been practicing law work since I was 19, she said. I have worked in 4 different cities and 2 territories. I have never let anyone come along on any part of a case who was not directly relevant to the outcome. She folded her hands on the table. I let you come along. From the second day, I do not do that. Why did you? He asked. She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she thought about anything. Because you didn't try to manage me, she said. You tried to help me. There's a difference that most men don't understand, and you understood it immediately. She paused. And because I trusted you. I trust very few people quickly. I trusted you quickly. I should have questioned that more, but every time I went looking for the reason not to, I didn't find one. There isn't one, he said. No, she agreed. There isn't. They ate and they talked, and the conversation moved through territory neither of them had covered before. His childhood in Ohio and the father who had loved the land and lost it. Her mother and the law books she had begun collecting at 14, and the slow, fierce building of a career in a field that did not particularly want women in it. They talked about the Wyoming Territory and what it was becoming and what it might become, and about the spring on the Ellison property that was now safely Margaret's again, and about Aaron's survey work and whether he intended to continue with it. I don't know, he said. My contract is effectively over. Croft Pacific won't rehire me after today. Do you want to continue survey work? She asked. I like the land, he said. I like being in it. The survey work is a means of doing that. He turned his coffee cup. I have some savings, not much. I've thought about filing for a homestead in the basin. There's open land south of the Ellison place. Good water, good grass." She looked at him. "You want to stay in Sweetwater?" "I want to stay near something that matters," he said, and the way he said it left no ambiguity about the layers of the sentence. She was quiet for a moment. "I have been offered a position," she said slowly, "with the Territorial Attorney General's office in Cheyenne, to work on land fraud cases across Wyoming. It was offered to me 6 weeks ago. I put off deciding because I was waiting to see how this case resolved." "And now?" he asked. "Now I think I may accept it," she said. "Cheyenne is 4 hours from Sweetwater by the stage." She paused. "Or less if one has a horse." He looked at her carefully. "Is that a fact?" "It is," she said, "a geographic fact, which, as you know, I am very precise about." The corner of his mouth moved. "Augusta, Aaron, I would like very much to keep having dinner with you," he said, "and to write letters if the stage holds the mail, and to come to Cheyenne when my homestead can spare me." "I would like all of those things," she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the same gesture she had made 2 nights before, and she turned her hand over under his and held on. The next several months were made of letters. Aaron wrote long ones, which surprised her, because she had expected a man who was more comfortable with physical space than with words to produce short communications. Instead, he wrote pages. Sitting at the table in the small house he was building on the homestead south of the Ellison property, describing the progress of the construction and the behavior of the horses he had acquired, and the conversations he had with Margaret Ellison, who had become something of a neighbor and a friend, and the quality of the autumn light on the basin, and the way the first snow came in November like a cloth being laid over the mountains. Augusta wrote back from Cheyenne, from the Attorney General's office, where she had taken a desk in a room with 3 male colleagues who had, initially, the usual collection of objections to sharing professional space with a woman, and who had, over the course of 3 weeks, one by one revised their positions as they observed the quality and speed and precision of her work. She wrote about the cases she was building, the patterns of land fraud she was documenting across the territory, the legal arguments she was developing with Judge Whitmore, who had become a formal mentor and colleague. She wrote about the investigator who had come to Sweetwater regarding Thomas Ellison's death, and who had in December filed a formal report concluding that the circumstances of Thomas Ellison's fatal accident presented significant inconsistencies and recommending further investigation. Devin Cross had quietly left the territory in November. Reginald Croft's Wyoming operations had been significantly reduced following the Cheyenne Daily Leader articles that James Haverford had published in September and October. The settlement had become public knowledge through the court records, and 2 other counties had begun reviewing disputed Croft Pacific easements in light of the Ellison case. She wrote in December from a hotel in Sweetwater where she had come for a week at Christmas, and Aaron read the letter on the morning she arrived, and then came to the hotel, and they spent the afternoon walking the basin together, the snow deep and clean on the ground, the mountains brilliant white against an improbable blue sky. He had built more of the house than she expected. She rode out to see it on her second day in town, and stood in the frame of the completed ground floor, and looked at the proportions and the stone fireplace he had built himself and the windows placed to catch the morning light, and she felt something about it that she was not quite ready to say yet. "It needs a library," she said. He looked at her. "A library. A room for books," she said, "with good shelving. The south wall would be right. The light is good there through the afternoon." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the south wall. Then he looked at her. "How big a library?" he asked carefully. "Depends on how many books it needs to hold," she said, equally carefully. "How many books does a person generally collect in the course of a legal career?" "A good many," she said. "Potentially quite a number." They stood in the half-built house in the cold December light, and the conversation they were having was not the one they were saying out loud, and they both knew it. "Augusta," he said, "the library would need to be at least 12 feet by 14, she said. for an adequate collection and proper storage conditions and a writing desk. "I can build that," he said. "I know you can," she said. She met his eyes. He was waiting, she realized very patiently, for her to arrive at the place she was already standing. She loved him for the patience. It was not something she had expected to be a quality she could love in a person, but she found that she did. "Aaron," she said, "I am not a woman who does things the conventional way. I am not going to wait to be asked. I'm also not entirely ready to ask. But I want you to know that when I am ready, I will ask, and the answer I am hoping for is yes." He looked at her for a moment. "Augusta," he said, "the answer is yes. It was yes since the night you rode 20 miles in the dark to send 3 telegrams, possibly 4, because you were willing to very slightly overstate your authority if the outcome was right." He paused. "The answer is yes for any version of the question you come up with." She took a breath. Then she crossed the cold floor and kissed him, with both hands on his face, in the house he had built with a wall she had already designated as a library. He kissed her back with the same quality he brought to everything, completely, without reservation, and with a steadiness that she found was exactly what she had not known she needed. She accepted the position with the Attorney General's office permanently in January. She negotiated a provision allowing her to work from both Cheyenne and Sweetwater, which was unusual, and which she presented to the Attorney General with a legal memo on the precedents for split-location professional arrangements that was so thorough he agreed before he had finished reading it. Aaron filed his homestead claim in February, 320 acres south of the Ellison property, with a spring of his own discovered on the eastern boundary that he had noted in his private records and had not mentioned to any employer. The homestead filing was approved in March. They married in Sweetwater in April, in the sitting room of Margaret Ellison's house, with Margaret as witness and the retired Judge Whitmore presiding, having ridden up from Cheyenne specifically for the occasion and declined all payment for the service. The ceremony was short and specific, without excessive ornamentation, the way Augusta preferred important things. When Judge Whitmore asked if she had words she wished to say, she had prepared none but found that the ones she needed were available. "You are the only person I have ever allowed to simply be alongside me without trying to change the direction I'm going," she said to Aaron. "You helped me without managing me. You respected what I knew without competing with it. And you looked at my way of being in the world and said yes instead of asking me to be something easier." She paused. "I intend to do the same for you for the rest of our lives." Aaron did not have prepared words either. He said, "You are the most honest and capable person I know. I love you for every part of that. I'm not always going to understand what you're doing, but I am always going to trust that you're doing it right, and I am always going to be here." He stopped. "That's all I have. That's everything," she said. The library Aaron built was 17 feet by 15, because when Augusta's books arrived from Denver in 4 crates, she discovered there were more than she had inventoried, and he expanded the plan without being asked and without comment, and it was ready before the crates arrived. The shelves were built from the same pine as the rest of the house, cut from trees he had cleared from the eastern slope, and the writing desk under the south window was made from a single wide plank of ash he had ordered specifically from Rawlins. Augusta arranged the books herself, over 2 days, in a system that made sense to her, and that Aaron made no attempt to second-guess. When she was finished, she stood in the library doorway and looked at it, and it looked exactly right, the light coming through the south window in the afternoon, the shelves full and ordered, the desk clear and ready. Aaron came to stand beside her. He looked at the room. "Good?" he asked. "Perfect," she said. Margaret Ellison came to dinner every Thursday. The territorial investigator returned to Sweetwater in the spring and conducted a more thorough review of Thomas Ellison's death, and by summer he had concluded with sufficient evidence that the death had not been accidental. Warrants were issued for 2 former Croft Pacific employees who had been present in Sweetwater in March of the previous year. Cross had gone east and proved difficult to locate, but the warrant had his name on it, and Augusta's carefully constructed evidence file supporting it, and she had no doubt it would eventually find him. Reginald Croft himself faced a formal fraud inquiry initiated by the Wyoming Territory Attorney General's office in the fall of 1884, an inquiry that Augusta had a significant role in building, drawing on the Sweetwater evidence and the additional 2 counties she had documented. The inquiry moved slowly, as these things did, but it moved, and Croft Pacific's Wyoming operations contracted further with each passing month. In November of 1884, Augusta and Aaron had their first child, a boy they named Thomas Aaron Hudson, the first name for Margaret's husband, and for the principle that some things should be remembered, the second for continuity. Thomas was born in the front bedroom of the house in Sweetwater, with Margaret Ellison holding Augusta's hand and the doctor from town and Aaron on the other side, steady and present and somewhat pale, which Augusta found endearing and which she did not mention for about 3 months, and then mentioned once, and he laughed. Thomas was a vigorous and opinionated child from his first hours, which his mother noted with scientific interest, and his father noted with a look that was equal parts pride and gentle alarm. He grew into a boy who wanted to know how everything worked, which suited a household with a law library and a father who understood the construction of buildings and landscapes. Augusta read to him from everything legal histories, natural histories, novels she had collected from Denver, the territorial newspaper, whatever was on her desk. Aaron took him on the survey walks he still occasionally did for other clients now, honest clients with legitimate claims, and taught him to read the land the way he read everything else. 2 years after Thomas, a daughter came. They named her Clara Margaret Hudson Margaret for the obvious reason. Clara because Augusta had always loved the name and had never said so out loud to anyone until Aaron asked her, 3 days before the birth, if she had any thoughts, and it came out immediately. Clara was quieter than her brother and more watchful, with dark eyes that took in everything before she committed to a response, which her mother recognized immediately, and which her father said, with great affection, would serve her extremely well in any argument ever. Margaret Ellison was at the house nearly every week. Her property had been expanded and improved, with her son William coming down from Cheyenne to help her build a new section on the barn and improve the irrigation for the kitchen garden. The spring on her north slope, which had been the final piece of Augusta's legal argument, turned out to be significantly larger than anyone had known, and in the years that followed it made the Ellison land genuinely prosperous, a prosperity that Margaret managed with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. William Ellison and Augusta had become colleagues of a kind. He sent her survey documentation when he encountered unusual land filings in his work, and she consulted him occasionally on geographic questions that arose in her cases, and he was deeply grateful in a way that was genuine and straightforward, which Augusta appreciated. The law practice she maintained from the library, in conjunction with the Attorney General's position, expanded beyond anything she had initially imagined. Other women in the territory began to hear about her. Letters came, some requesting help, some requesting advice, some simply written by women who wanted to tell someone that they had heard about the Ellison case, and it had made them feel that the world contained something worth fighting for. She answered every letter. Sometimes she referred cases to other qualified practitioners. Sometimes she took them herself. Aaron built more of the homestead through those years, methodically and well. He added rooms as they were needed, always with the same care about light and proportion that had been there from the beginning. He acquired more land, legitimately and carefully, and ran a modest cattle operation that was never large enough to be impersonal and never small enough to be precarious. He was good at it. He was good at most practical things, in the way of people who pay close attention to the world around them and learn from what they see. They argued sometimes. Augusta was not a woman who backed away from a position she had reasoned into, And Aaron was not a man who was going to pretend to agree with something he did not. And they were both too direct for the small concealments that some couples use to avoid friction. But their arguments were honest and contained, conducted with the mutual respect of two people who have already established very clearly that they are on the same side, and they resolved without lasting damage and sometimes with a clarity that improved what followed. In the spring of 1887, Reginald Croft's fraud inquiry concluded with a formal judgment against Croft Pacific Railway Company that included significant financial penalties and a mandated review of all territorial easement filings made since 1879. The judgment cited, in its opening pages, the Ellison case as the foundational documentation for the pattern of fraud it described. Augusta's name appeared in the official record 3 times. She read the judgment the evening it arrived, sitting at her desk in the library while Thomas, who was 2, was asleep in the next room, and Clara was somewhere in Aaron's vicinity making the confident small sounds of an infant who has a clear sense of how the household operates. Aaron came to stand in the library door and watched her read. When she finished, she set the document down and sat for a moment. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. She looked up. He was leaning in the doorframe, arms folded, watching her with that expression she had come to know extremely well over 4 years, the one that was warm and proud and quiet all at once, the one that she had stopped trying to prevent herself from loving approximately 2 weeks after the first time she noticed it. "Thomas Ellison's name is in the judgment," she said, "in the footnotes, as a specific case of identified fraud." She paused. "He is acknowledged." "He deserved to be," Aaron said. She stood from the desk and crossed to him and put her arms around him, and he held her in the library doorway with the lamp burning behind her on the desk and the evening settling over the basin outside. "We should tell Margaret tomorrow," she said. "We will," he said. They stood there for a moment. Through the window, the Wyoming sky was doing what it did in the evenings, going through its full repertoire of color, the gold and the rose and the deep clear blue that held the stars at its edge, the mountains going dark and clean against it. "Augusta," he said. "Yes. I want you to know something," he said. He sounded thoughtful rather than urgent, the way he sounded when he had been sitting with a thing for a while. "Before you came to Sweetwater, before all of it, I was doing survey work I knew was wrong. For a man I had begun to suspect was worse than wrong, and I was doing it because it was the work I had, and because I told myself the land didn't care who surveyed it." He paused. "And then you came around a corner in the early morning with your head in a notebook and nearly got run down by my horse, and you looked up at me and said, 'Notary law,' and something in me that had been sitting very still started moving again." She was quiet, listening. "You gave me a reason to be better than I was being," he said. "Not because you asked me to, not because you needed me to be, but because watching you be exactly what you were made me want to be what I actually was." He paused. "I have never found the right way to say that properly." "You just did," she said against his shoulder. "Perfectly." He held her closer. After the children were asleep and the house was quiet, they sat on the porch in the cold spring dark with coffee, looking out at the basin where the grass was coming in new, and the mountains were still holding their winter snow in the high places. The dog Aaron had acquired the previous autumn, a big, amiable cattle dog named Scout who had excellent opinions about where he should sleep, was lying at the edge of the porch with his head on his paws, watching the dark with the contentment of an animal that has found the right household. "Next year," Augusta said, "I want to take the children to Philadelphia, to show them where I grew up." "We'll go," he said. "And then Denver," she said. "The law library where I worked before I came west. I want them to see it." "All right." "And then back," she said. "Back here." "Back here," he agreed. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The Wyoming night was enormous and quiet and clear, the stars thickly spread across the black, the way they were in high clear country, and the basin stretched out below them, and the spring on the Ellison land and the spring on their own eastern boundary were both running, clear and cold, the way they always had, long before anyone arrived to argue about them. Augusta Grayson Hudson had won the case that everyone else had declined to take. She had built the argument from nothing, in 3 weeks of late nights, on sheer preparation and intelligence, and the absolute refusal to accept that a widow without resources was therefore a widow without recourse. She had filed it before the sun rose and beaten Reginald Croft at the moment he had been most certain of his own victory. She had also, in the course of doing it, found the person beside whom everything made the most sense, which was not something she had planned and was therefore perhaps the best part. The dog shifted on the porch. The wind came off the mountains. The stars turned slowly overhead. In the courthouse in Laramie, in the official record of the territorial court, the Ellison property filing stood with its date and its time 4:47 in the morning, and the name of the paralegal woman who had stood in the pre-dawn dark and handed the duty clerk 3 weeks of work and changed what was possible for everyone who came after. In Sweetwater, in the stone and pine house with the library on the south wall, Augusta Hudson set her coffee cup down and took her husband's hand, and they sat together in the enormous quiet dark and watched the stars move across the Wyoming sky. And it was enough, and it was more than enough, and it was exactly right.